We now get round to the gritty bit of this particular section on pragmatics, and that is, what does relevance theory actually have to tell us about the way in which language is used in context, and particularly how it means what it means in context, how utterances are interpreted by speakers. Obviously, we've suggested that that involves two aspects: the decoding of the code bit that's inside the utterance, and then looking at the utterance within the context in which speakers are speaking and hearers are hearing, and putting those two together to infer what it is that speakers actually intend hearers to mean. Let's start with something that is so obvious it should hardly need saying, but since it's so obvious we don't often think about it. Humans are intensely curious. They may not appear to be curious, but fundamentally humans are curiosity driven. What that means is they're constantly updating their cognitive environment, and they can't help but do that. That's a fundamental human drive, trying to improve the knowledge that you have of the world inside your head, in fact, the worlds inside your head, all these possible worlds. We want always to know more about the world. And there's more to it than that. As human beings, we actively seek out ways to improve our cognitive environment. We run after ways of doing that. We don't sort of sit back in an armchair and let it come to us. We're active seekers after improvements to our cognitive environment. And the way that relevance theory thinks about that is we seek out new propositions. We're trying to improve the way we represent the world in our heads by looking for new propositions, or alternatively becoming more or less certain of the truth value of assumptions we already hold. So if we think that someone is, say, 36 years old, we are interested if we find that that's something we are mildly certain about. We're more certain of it after we've done a bit more investigation. Our curiosity has led us in that direction, or we find that we were wrong. So they're all ways of improving knowledge that we as human beings already have, and that also suggests that as we get older we have more of it. There's more and more propositional knowledge sitting in our cognitive environment. Some of it, as we get older, we may have trouble retrieving, but nevertheless we continue our search for improvements in our cognitive environment. So we're curiosity-driven beasts. So how does communication involve itself in that process? Clearly, the way in which we think about communication is that information goes from speaker to hearer, and that's the old code model. The relevance theorists think about it in a slightly more sophisticated way. The first thing they ask themselves is, why do humans pay attention to anything that looks like someone is trying to communicate with them? And we do. We're constantly on the lookout for anything that looks as though it is communicating with us. We make assumptions about that. We see it as pointing to some end. So someone is saying something, and we think immediately, oh, this must be relevant to us. In other words, it will improve our cognitive environment. Because we're curiosity driven, that's how we do our focusing on the communication of other people. So let's suppose that I'm traveling through Iran, and I ask an old man in a small village in Iran where the local mosque might be. I may have difficulty doing that because My Farsi may not be too good. The locals might call it Persian, but it's one of the family of Farsi languages. Well, I do my best. He sort of roughly gets it, and he raises his stick in the direction that he's walking. Why do I assume that he's trying to communicate? I've done what I can to try and ask a question, and all he's done is raised his stick. Well, he may be doing his morning exercises, but I take it that he's trying to communicate in answer to my question. I presume it's an answer to my question, i.e. he's communicating to me in a relevant way. Ostensive in this situation means pointing in a very general sense. And the second thing is, his communication is something we infer. Just raising a stick is just raising a stick, but we infer that by doing it, he is communicating with us, and we infer what the intent of that communication is, namely that he's trying to answer our question, and we further infer that the mosque is further along the road that the old man is currently travelling. So I infer that the answer is something like, if you continue in the direction I am now walking, you will get to the mosque. That's what that stick movement is doing. It's not a proposition as such, but we infer the proposition from the act that he's performed, namely raising his stick. So communicating others can be seen as a way of improving your cognitive environment. You're listening to what it is that they're communicating, and you make assumptions that your interlocutor, the speaker, is saying something that will be relevant to you. So principle 2 of the relevance theory says that humans follow a strategy. They always follow a strategy, unless they're asleep, of course. But when they're listening to someone, when there's anything that looks as though it is communicating, they presume that all ostensive inferential communication conveys a presumption of its own optimal relevance. Wow, that's a fairly long-winded way of saying that. What does it mean? It means we take it that when we think someone is intending to communicate with us, that what they're communicating will be optimally relevant to us, that it will make the biggest possible difference to our cognitive environment. That's what we assume, and that's what the relevance theory suggests. Why do we do that? If we didn't, we'd miss out on a way of improving our cognitive environment, and because we're curious beasts, we want to improve our cognitive environment, and so we make this presumption of optimal relevance. That is, we're assuming that any act, when someone is communicating with us, conveys the fact that it's going to be optimally relevant to us. That's something we assume. Well, what's optimal relevance when it's at home? Generally speaking, we live in the real world, and in the real world we have limited time. So when we're listening to someone else, speeches coming out of other people's mouths at 4 or 5 syllables a second, and if we're hunting for optimal relevance, we have a limited time to do it. So we want to get the most out of what other people are saying. In other words, we want to extract, to infer the maximum amount of useful information to improve our cognitive environment, but in the least time. So principle 1 says that human cognition in general is aimed at maximizing relevance, that is, getting the largest number of positive cognitive effects for the least effort, because we don't have much time. So if you think of this as a general processing notion, it has to do with the way in which we operate in general. All the time when we're looking around, we focus on those things that we think will give us the maximum information that is relevant to us. So, for example, if you're crossing the road, you're looking for cars that might knock you over. That's a relevant amount of information. It's not strictly communication, but the same thing goes for human processing in general. We try to improve our state of knowledge of the world in the least possible time, and of course it follows that we don't take notice of other things.